Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Roger Nelson. I'm a curator at National Gallery Singapore, and it's my great pleasure to chair today's lecture and to thank you all for being here. This is the first in a series of lectures organised in advance of an exhibition which will open at National Gallery Singapore in November of this year. The lecture series, like the exhibition, is titled Living Pictures, Photography in Southeast Asia, and it seeks to study the histories of photography in this region from the 19th century until the present. First, let me go through quickly the format of today's lecture. After my very brief introduction, we'll be hearing from Dr. Alex Supartono. He'll be speaking for about 45 minutes. Immediately following, Dr. Charmaine To, a fellow curator at National Gallery Singapore, will offer a short response of around 10 minutes. After that, there'll be time for an open discussion where both speakers can address your questions. As today's event is organised as a webinar, rather than switching on your microphone and speaking, we ask that you type your questions into the Q&A box. This means that you can type your questions in any time while either of the speakers are speaking, and we will address them when we reach the discussion segment of today's session. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers for today. I'm not going to read through their bios in detail, as you will have seen them on the announcements for today's lecture, but instead just to emphasize just how much both speakers have contributed to the studies of photography and its histories in Southeast Asia. Alex Supartono of Edinburgh Napier University brings together his studies and training in Western art history and photography histories with his practice, including curatorial practice with contemporary photography here in Southeast Asia. By bringing together the studies of art history, photography history and critical theory, he offers new perspectives on these fields. Alex is actually the co-convener of this lecture series with National Gallery Singapore, reflecting the gallery's commitment to collaborating with leading scholars of Southeast Asia internationally. The respondent for today, Charmaine To, is a curator at National Gallery Singapore. Her research on Singapore photography history and her curatorial work really leading the gallery's integration of photography histories into regional art histories in our exhibitions means we're sure she'll have a lot to say about Alex's lecture today. So without further ado, thank you all for being here, and over to you, Alex. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, National Gallery, for organizing this event. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, from wherever you are. My today talk will evolve around the natures of antiquities photograph in the 19th century Java. But we will look at this antiquities photograph from the photo historical perspective. So I will try to discuss the tensions with the tensions between this archaeological photography practice, between archaeological record and social documentary, but as well as art. And taking the cue from the photo historical perspective, my talk will also try to see the impact of the Dutch archaeological effort to the early days of camera in colonial Indonesia, in the Dutch East Indies. Now I will share my screen. Okay, somebody can notify me if this screen is been shared, okay?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, right. I will start with these publications from 18 1893, when the Royal Institute of Language, Land, and Ethnology of the Netherlands Indies, now known as the KITLV, published this manuscript entitled Prambanan Temple in Central Java after excavations. The monograph was put together by Dr. Isaac Gruneman in his positions as the representative of the Netherlands Royal Academy of Science and the honorary chairman of the Society of the Antiquarians, Linguistic, and Ethnological Research of Principality of Yogyakarta. Because it's very long name, hereafter I will call this society as Archaeological Society. The monograph consists of 62 calotypes of 9th century Hindu Javanese temple complex in Prambanan. This is just outside the Sultanate of Yogyakarta in Central Java. These calotypes were taken by Cephas, who was inscribed in the cover of that monograph as the hoofdfotograaf, the court photographer in Yogyakarta. The majority of the photograph showcase the relief of great artistry and vividness of scenes from the Rama adventure, from the Ramayana, which reveal their notions, their intentions as archaeological record. This photograph, this calotype. Other photographs from the publications signal documentary impetus that override their archaeological functionality. For example, depicting activities, albeit orchestrated, of supposedly Dutch archaeologists, the locals, and the photographer himself on the expense of the overall view of the temple. Writing in 1904, archaeologists and the pioneers of the study of Hindu Javanese art, Dr. G.L.A. Brandes, labeled the Prambanan excavation project as an, quote, archaeological murder, or, quote, a large-scale archaeological slaughter, referring to the unsystematic process of the excavation work. Brandes, on the left, was a member of the Royal Batavian Society of Arts and Science. Hereafter, let's call this organization Batavian Society. And he is also the chair of the commissions for archaeological research in the Netherlands Indies on Java and Madura. So he was the right persons to make this assessment, hence the judgment. Whereas Gruneman, an amateur archaeologist, he was an author and also the physicians to the Sultan of Yogyakarta, Hamengkubuwono VI, and also the chairs of the above-mentioned Yogyakarta-based Archaeological Society, which was an amateur society. He responded furiously to the Brandes account and accusing Brandes as a supreme antagonist who tried to oppose him in all possible ways. And this heated continue. And for example, on an official site visits of the head of the archaeological service of the École Française de Extrême Orient, M. Parmentier, of course organized by Brandes, in that visit, that visit was deliberately and demonstratively sidelined Groneman, who was, as Groneman put it, I quote, the honorary chairman of the Equivalence Archaeological Service of Parmentier. So the altercations between Brandes and Groneman was a debate between the disciplinary authoritative voice of the former, Brandes, and a well-informed and passionate amateurs of the latter, Groneman. The colorful exchange of words between the two figures who saw themselves as the guardians of the Javanese antiquity illustrated the growing archaeological interest in Java against the backdrop of the 19th century international competition in archaeological research among colonial powers. It coupled with the effort to restore Dutch national pride after they were being pipped by the Lieutenant General Raffles and his associate in their archaeological activities during the British interregnum in Java between 1811 and 1815 or 16, and their perceived status as the founder of Dutch East Indies archaeology, following the publications of the very well-known The History of Java in 1817 by Raffles, which include significant numbers of archaeological findings in that book, as exemplified by this drawing of the ruin of the Shiva temple of Prambanan. Raffles and co, without doubt, had stimulated Dutch archaeological effort in Java in the second half of the 19th century. Prambanan complex had come to Dutch administrative official attentions as early as 1805. That's early 19th century, when Nicolaus Engelhard, the governors of the Java northeastern coast between 1801 and 1808, when he ordered to clean and to make drawing of Prambanan complex. Engelhard's archaeological patience was also manifested in his activities collecting statues from archaeological sites around East and Central Java and displayed them in his residency's garden in Semarang in Central Java. So this quote-unquote archaeological practice was not alien to Cephas in his commercial works. On the screen, you can see an album and 3 photographs depicting the gardens of the Dutch residency house in Yogyakarta, graced with statues from various nearby temples. These photographs were taken by Cephas around the same time of the Prambanan project. The album, typically produced by commercial photo studios, which usually include landmark view of the city, the Sultanate Palace, portraits of dignitaries and local activities, and the house of the residents, the highest ranking of colonial officials in the area, and as the title suggests, 15 photographs of Cephas's Mendut temples. This photograph, these albums and the photograph in it signals the popular appreciations of Javanese antiquity among, at least, the colonial elites who were Cephas's clientele. Let's go back to the Prambanan project. So the Society of the Society of the Antiquarians, Linguistic and Ethnological Research of the Principality of Yogyakarta, that archaeological society, it was founded in 1885. So the amateur society's first task was to clear the ground and the overground vegetations at the temple complex with the financial support from the Batavian Society, that's technically the Dutch governments, and the Sultan of Yogyakarta, Hamengkubuwono the Seventh. So this clearance work was initiated by G.W. Isermans, the founding chairman of that associations, who was also an amateur archaeologist enthusiast, and he was also the chief engineer of the state railway, who stationed in Yogyakarta. Gruneman, who succeeded Isermans and completed the works in 1889, and 4 years later, he published the above mentioned monograph. The Prambanan excavation project in the 1880s technically was a project of an amateur archaeological associations with the support from the professional scholarly bodies such as the Batavian Society and the KIDLG. It was executed and delivered by self-taught archaeologists, Iserman and Gruneman, and was assessed and examined by trained archaeologists such as Brandes. Contemporary accounts on the excavation and restoration works, which was based on detailed reports from the period in discussion, conclude, I quote, while Iserman's negligence is regrettable, the work of his successor, Gruneman, was a disaster, end quote. This is a reference to careless and uninformed methods, the loss of irretrievable data, and the use of ornamented stones and large slabs of various building purposes for various building purposes, for house foundations, for dams, for even to use to build the Prambanan train stop station. Remember, Iserman is the chief engineers of the railway company, as well as the removal several reliefs for diplomatic purposes under the supervisions of Isermans and Gruneman. In the light of this archaeological mismanagement, debates, and acquisitions, the involvement of photography and the photographers came actually from the higher ground in terms of the clarity of the objective and the advancement of photography practice in Java, when the assignments to photograph Javanese antiquity was properly well underway as early as 1862. In fact, the arrival of camera in 1840 was archaeological in nature. Just a reminder for everybody, the daguerreotype was, the announcement of daguerreotype invention was in June or July in the summer 1839, and it takes 3 months at least to travel from Europe to Southeast Asia. So this is a very early days of the arrivals of camera in colonial Indonesia, in the Dutch East Indies, and it was archaeological in nature. So although Jurian Muni, the person who brought this actual daguerreotype to Java, although he failed to operate the first daguerreotype in Java between 1840 and 1841, and none of his photographs survive, we learn from his expedition report in 1842 that, I quote, photography is able to serve to make faithful reproductions of Javanese antiquity. But it is desirable that another instrument should be sent from Europe, larger, better built, and resistant to the humidity, end quote. In this report, Munich also made reference of statues and bas-reliefs in Javanese temple to the Western/Greek mythology. 3 years later, in 1845, Munich published an article entitled "Some Contributions to Research of Antiquities in Java," and his details note was and is still consulted by his contemporaries and present-day scholars alike. That's just to give you an evidence the archaeological natures of camera arrivals in Indonesia, in Java, in Batavia. So, like I said, despite its failure, the first employment of camera in Java was primarily archaeological in purpose. Its disappointing results, I would argue, change the course of photography development in the Dutch East Indies, when the Ministry of Colonies welcomed Adolf Schäfer, a Dresden-born commercial photographer who made portrait and offered technical instructions in the daguerreotype process in The Hague. This non-government official outsourcing aimed to move from Munich's, I quote, amateurist experiment to the professional productions of photograph to be, I quote, used as for archaeological science. Against the natures, the second official employments of camera still archaeological in natures. And at the same time, it marked the arrival of photography in its commercial capacity through the figure of the commercial daguerreotypist Adolf Schäfer. Schäfer arrived in Batavia in June 1844, and 6 months later, he advertised his daguerreotype portrait service in the local newspaper with the promise to overcome technical obstacles caused by the tropical humidity. Schäfer's commercial activity was to prove his worth before Batavian Society commissioned him to photograph their antiquity collections in April 1845. Dozens of antiquities were photographed outdoor against neutral backdrop and put on pedestal. His still life is comparable to his contemporaries working in similar climate and subject, as we've seen on the screen, the daguerreotype still life of the fallen capitals in the Temple of Horus in Egypt, taken by French photographers Giroud de Pengui in 1844. Schäfer also experimented with multiple angles and lighting to display the same object with different appearance. And in doing so, he reminded us his agency that we look at this artifact through him, that his role was not only recording and making documents, but also displaying his encounter with the statue of the Hindu gods. So this is one of the earliest surviving evidence talk about this very topic. However, Cephas struggled to photograph in the actual archaeological site on site. He failed to overcome the technical issues from darkroom to the focal lengths of the lenses that gave him hard time navigating the narrow corridor of the Borobudur, and crucially forbid him to photograph the whole structures of the Buddhist temple in one plate. That is unacceptable for the Batavian society as his employer. Instead, Cephas compensated this failure with the mosaic, which was not obviously acceptable for the board of the Batavian society, and eventually terminated the contract. To pay his debt, the government's to the government, Cephas worked as commercial daguerreotypist. Although his commercial works are unknown, Cephas is considered the earliest commercial photographers and photo studio operating in the Dutch is in this. I do really hope that we can see some of his commercial works. It was recorded that he had a studio in Semarang and also as far as Sumeneb in Madura, but none of his commercial works survive as long as we know. I've never seen any of them. The next, after this failure, so Munich failed, Cephas was not a success either. So, but the next archaeological assignments was not until 17 years later. That was from 1844, 45. Meanwhile, in those 17 years, the advancement of photographic technology and techniques, particularly in the 1850s, mainly through the inventions of the wet collodion process and the album print, this advancement allow the professionalizations of photography that usher in its transformations into a commodity and commercial enterprise. And this is very important developments within the context, so-called the scientific project of photography in this archaeological project. Where was I? So because of this this advancement, because of the arrivals of the wet collodions process and album print, itinerant photographers with temporary studios or permanently based studio were start competing for clientele in cosmopolitan city like Batavia, the colonial name of Jakarta. And the high-profile government archaeological assignment was there for everyone to grab. So while the Dutch colonial government didn't make any assignments, the objective was still there. People still talk about the assignment. People still talk about the failures of the two assignments before. So any photographers who arrive in Jakarta in the second half of the early second half of the 19th century, they will be informed by this high-profile government assignments. For example, in a letter to his mother on 2nd of September 1857, this is only less than 5 months after Walter Woodbury arrived in Jakarta, in Batavia. He wrote to his mom, I quote, "It is most likely from what we have lately heard that we may be commissioned to make photographs of them." Them mean Javanese antiquity for the government. So everybody knows about this high profile assignments. They just have not started to assign anybody yet. Walter Woodbury and Page, this English studio, managed to they even managed to sell 2 photographs of Javanese antiquity they took during their travel across Java to the Batavian society. This is not the 2 photographs they sell. I couldn't confirm that, but this is the photograph that they took during their travel to East Java. But although they managed to sell their photograph to the Batavian society, they didn't get the commissions. The commissions went to their competitor, to a photographer named Isidore van Kinsbergen, when he, in December 1862, signed a contract with the Batavian Society of the Art and Science to photograph a list of Javanese antiquity. It was not clear why it took almost 2 decades for the 3rd assignment. It is probable that they, the Batavian Society, learned from experience not to import photographers from Europe. Perhaps they waited for the advancements of photography practice in the tropic to make sure the technical issues, particularly humanity of the tropic, has been resolved. As the history of the medium told us, the commercial enterprise has been the best place to advance photography technology when photography transformed into, to quote Elizabeth Macaulay, industrial madness with the dynamics of supply and demand. In such environments, in that industrial madness, the Batavian society could afford to choose which photographers will be suitable for the assignments and probably align with their artistic preferences. The 2 photographs you see on the screen demonstrate a contrasting approach between Woodbury and Page Studio and Isidore van Kinsbergen in photographing antiquity, Javanese antiquity. On the left, as you know, is the Woodbury and Page photograph of Ganesha statue in the ruins of a temple complex in Singasari, taken during their 2nd trip to East Java in 1860s. On the right is Kinsbergen's first photograph in the project, depicting Batavian society collections of stone sculptures from East Java that were exhibited in the botanical gardens in Bogor, near Jakarta, near Batavia in West Java, in 1863. Both photographs are album prints. So album print is one of the main photographic printing process between 1855 and 1890s. So the characters of the album prints, it's with the typical slight glows and sepia color tones, ranging from dark purple to golden brown. I don't know whether you can see this in your screen, but in these 2 photographs show the other 2 ends. So that's you see here that Woodbury and Page move toward the golden brown end, and Kinsbergen's move toward the dark purple end. So that's kind of thing. So we all sometimes we photo student jokes that actually photographers in that period they try to develop their signatures moving within the range of sepia tones, how they develop their unique characteristics between the dark purple and golden brown of sepia tones. So just to go a little bit further to this kind of approach, visual approach, the German Henry Schunz, this is another photographer, advertised himself as a former apprentice in Woodbury and Pitt studio, and he always say whose photographs were, quote, well known for their clearness and finish. So the clearness and finish refer to a bright, sharp image, a balanced distributions of light to reduce contrast, as everything inside the frame are equally important. If we look at the photograph on the left, the statue of Ganesha, in slightly elevated angle, the Ganesha statue occupies the majority of the frame, with enough space to inform us that the statue was on location where the photographer found it. The statue was positioned so we can see the majority, the most important and the most interesting part of this three-dimensional object. We are indulged with the details because of the well-distributed light and minimized shadows. Woodbury and Page want us to see the statue as clear and finished object. And the way it was, following Henry Fox Talbot notice to the readers of Pencil of Natures, the way it was, quote, impressed by the agency of light alone, end quote. In other words, we are looking at the photograph. Whereas in Kinsbergen, we are looking through the photograph. This four antiquities object of deification statue in the forms of goddess of Parvati, I'm moving from the left to the right, Nandi, male deification statue, and Ganesha in the front, they are all Majapahit sculpture. This Majapahit is from 13th and 16th AD, brought in by the founders of the botanical garden Caspar Reinwart from archaeological sites in East Java. So this is part of those archaeological practice, just they're moving around the archaeological object from their original site. They were collected, these four sculptures. They were arranged, they were ordered, and they were displayed for exhibition purpose. The direct sunlight was controlled to underline the centerpiece of the sacred bull of Nandi in the middle. And that direct light used to highlight the characteristics of its limestone material. Kinsbergen refused to use reflective screen to tame the harsh tropical sunlight. That screen is the standard equipment at the time, and most likely used by Woodbury and Page to distribute the light evenly, because he wanted to have contrasting light and shade to create depth and liveliness of the sculptures, or in Saskia Asser's term, the, I quote, theatrical effect, to bring out the dramatic expressive powers of object he photographed. He is Isidore van Kinsbergen, obviously. The looking at and the looking through photographs of archaeological objects, following Frederick Boder, is, I quote, seeing the object within the context of art versus science, end quote. The difference lays in the way we, and the photographers, value the object being photographed. Making archaeological photograph as scientific document serve practical purpose to exchange visual informations. Camera operate as, quote, faithful pictorial record, as that guy Arago put it. The photograph should be, following Woodbury and Page, clear and finished, whereas in the context of art is the realms of, quote, almost unlimited variety of photograph from, so it's, sorry, I repeat, whereas in the context of art, is the realm of almost unlimited variety of photograph from a single object. And in the process, the desires to express emotions overcome the task to document the object. Here we see the tension between the archaeological photograph as archaeological record that serve functions, or as, let's say, art. Unfortunately, we have very little information about more about what Woodbury thinks about Javanese antiquity compared to Kinsbergen's very long notes about this thing, about his experience taking the photograph of Javanese antiquity. But we know that the Woodbury and Page studio included Javanese antiquity photograph in their photographic albums for general purchase. So this is another topic for another day to see this archaeological photograph within the context of purely within commercial context, because this is, I'm sure, related to the British entrepreneur natures of the camera early days. Before these very inventions of carte de visite. Now let's go back to Kinsbergen, our focus today. Whilst for Kinsbergen, apart from the context of archaeological assignments, he himself developed his own artistic affinity with the Javanese antiquities and the Javanese artistic tradition at large. So Kinsbergen arrived in Batavia in 1851. That's 5 years before Woodbury and Page arrived. And he arrived as an artist, as a lithographer. He was a set painter. He was an opera singer. So this multi-talents and his charming personality brought him to the center of the elite colonial society, and more importantly, define his engagement with the local cultures, including the Javanese antiquity that he photographed later. So, in short, Kinsbergen didn't arrive as a photographer. He arrived as other things, but photographer. In 1855, Kinsbergen worked for Ang Tua Francois Lacote, French photographers, retouching and coloring the French photographers' works, who produced first photograph on glass and paper in Jakarta, in Batavia. In this period, arguably, Kinsbergen's learn and master the camera under the tropical sun and humidity. Wheels involved in theater productions, the musical activity, and all other things. And I think this is the important element that we need to remember. That's arguably Kinsbergen was the first European Western photographers who learned photography in the colony, hence understanding the humidity. So humidity and the harsh tropical sunlight were taken as a given reality for him, not as a surprise compared to Muni and Adolf Sefer. In February 1872, 7 years after his first involvement with photography, 7 years, Kinsbergen traveled as the official photographers for the Dutch missions to Bangkok. And from this travel, we start to see Kinsbergen photograph, which share similar approaches to photograph of Pierre Roziers and his quote-unquote students, the first Thai photographer Francis Chit, as we can observe on the screen. This is another topic of another day that very worth for pursuing this kind of artistic thread across 19th century Southeast Asia, because as we know, the natures of 19th century photography in Southeast Asia very regional in character. So this is one of tiny examples how we can start to connect those dots, connecting, for example, Kinsbergen's and Francis Chit. So at the end of the end of the same year, Kinsbergen signed the contract with the Batavian Society to photograph the Javanese antiquity. The fact that Kinsbergen had been in Java for more than 10 years, more than a decade, before he photographed Javanese antiquities, contributed to the way he valued them, I would argue, compared to Woodbury and Pate, who traveled across Java on the same years of their arrival on the 1857. And their known antiquity photographs are dated as early as 1860s. And that is coupled with the fact that Kinsbergen's learned to operate camera in the tropic. So the harsh, like I said earlier, the harsh sunlight and humidity was a given variables rather than obstacles, as the case of Muni and Sefer. Kinsbergen's developed simultaneously understanding of the local cultures and artistic traditions with the local climate. So the combine of the two, the local climate and the local culture. And the combinations of the two enable him to look through Javanese antiquity and therefore offer a particular vision which was defined by the climate, defined by the understanding of the Javanese antiquity, a particular vision that was distinctively informed and tropical. That is the visions that J.P. Rouffaer described in his article, Monumentale Kunst op Java, Monumental Art from Java. That's in when photographers, I could endure, quote, the silent waiting, even if it were to take days for the most favorable moment in which an image or relief with the full beauty of light and shadow reveal itself. So that's this part of that kind of vision, to understand the climate, to understand and the light, and combine that with the understanding of the object. So like I said, the distinctively informed and tropical. So Rouffaer wrote the article that I just referred, actually wrote by Rouffaer it's actually the article was a long review of a book entitled "The Decorative Arts in the Dutch Indies Hindu Monuments in Central Java," published and the article published in the Dutch periodical De Gedicht in 1809. So it was a review of a book, and the book was put together by E.A. von Seher. And Seher, he designed the Hindus monument from Dutch East Indies for the pavilions at the Paris World Colonial Expo in 1900. So I think the book, this book was published in conjunctions with that expo. In that book, Seher included 22 plates of Javanese antiquity photograph from Isidore van Kinsbergen and Kassian Cephas. All of those photographs in those plates are cropped and edited for the purpose of the publication. Rouffaer, this is the person that bring me to this kind of invite me to look at this archaeological photograph from non-archaeological perspective. Rouffaer is an autodidact archaeologist and an art historian. He in 1879 he abandoned his study and traveled to Italy to learn about art. Although he didn't take a degree, he never take a degree. He didn't have any degree, in fact, which troubled him, which caused him some trouble later, because obviously he works in the Kaitel phase, academic institutions without degree, so you are pariah, something like that. So it was the time, go back to 1879, when he abandoned his study. He studied engineering, I think. There was a time when Rouffaer fell in love with the ancient artifact. During his travel to Italy in 1879, he wrote to his friend, I cannot describe how much I'm enjoying this. I've traveled through all Italy and seen much beauty, and yet I can guarantee you that these Greek temples are the highlight of all that I have enjoyed. How often have I not thought, oh, had I but lived in that glorious era, end quote. Before his departure to the Dutch East Indies in 1885, the first one, the one in the photograph in the second trip, I think, Rouffaer made another trip to Italy, but actually he never made it to Greece to visit the Greek archaeological antiquities that he admired so much. This is just a very brief and unjustified background of Rouffaer. He was so much more than what I can inform you here. But the context why I mention Italy here and his admirations to Greek temple is the fact that he never visited Greece. It's the fact that he learns about the beauty of the Greek antiquity from the photograph of the Greek antiquity. Because when Rouffaer was in Italy, Greek antiquity had been extensively photographed for almost 40 years. That is for 1879. And the first photograph of Greek antiquity, Greek archaeological sites dating, of course, 1839. So that's different discussion then, because when the photographer was invented, it was used to start to document the source of European civilizations, and the source of European civilizations, of course, in Greece. So photograph of classical ruins in Greece by European and American photographers, people like Francis Cheat, James Robertson, the Scots, and the American G.W. Stillmans, their works were widely circulated since 1840s. Italian photographers themselves, such as the Alinari brothers, they explore archaeological sites in their neighboring country since early 1850s, although their works mostly dated in 1890s. That's a little bit later. But that is to say, that's the style of photographing antiquities already well developed through the 40-year practice of photographing Greek antiquity, so to speak. That's what Rouffaer saw in his trip to through Italy, and that's the lens that he had in his mind when he made the trip to Java to look at the actual archaeological site as well as the photograph of Javanese archaeological object and sites. In Kinsbergen's photograph of the Buddha head profile from Borobudur, Rouffaer recognized the resemblance of the pictorial commonplace in the photographic representations of Greek archaeological sites. I quote, this is Rouffaer text, that Buddha profile that van Kinsbergen made unspeakably beautiful to an everlasting living pleasure. The triumph of art, the way photography can be, those grippingly noble lines, those severely canonical threaded curls, that glorifying glowing light over the face sunk in deep contemplations. It is for us the apotheosis of Buddhism, just as the Zeus of Otrikoli is the apotheosis of Greek religiousness. End quote. Kinsbergen's control of light continued to elude Rouffaer. In this, for this photograph, it's another quote from Rouffaer. In additions, the sculptures lean back a little in carved out niches where the fierce tropical sunlight shine upon the lower half of the bodies with magical force, yet envelopes the silent, expressive head in mystical shade. In the same way, Kinsbergen has seen this magnificently and reproduced this on his third card, Cartier's photograph in the series, magnificently. So this is two things: to see things magnificently and to photograph things magnificently. And this is what is wrong, then this is exactly the issue with Kassian Cephas. Because according to Rouffaer, Cephas' photograph failed to match the magnificence of the object they represented and become merely a mechanical reproduction. So Rouffaer became known to photo historian concerns with the Dutch Indies because of his not very nice assessment to Kassian Cephas. So all books about photography in the Dutch Indies always have Rouffaers in their bibliography, and usually the quotes about his quote usually those book quotes Rouffaer's assessments, not so nice assessments about Cephas, that Cephas reduce the functions of photography into the mechanical production, mechanical art compared to Kinsbergen. The context is comparing to Kinsbergen's works within this very particular setting, as I show you. So actually, Roger, am I running out of time?
Hi, Alex. Yes, it's just gone 6 o'clock. It would be good if we could wrap up soon.
All right. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. I will speed up. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. So Rouffaer cross-reference the crop photograph depicting the Hindu god in the above-mentioned publications on the right with the original photograph from the collections of the KTLV. So as the first librarians and later initiated the institution photography collections, Rouffaer was well informed with the works of the two official photographers of Archaeological Society and Batavian Society, respectively, Cephas and Kinsbergen. Comparing the crop to the original, Rouffaer concluded, I quote, and rightly so, all side panels are omitted, which are often so annoying because of their distractions from the main character. Cephas has lacked good taste or has not taken the time to render something of outstanding beauty in spatial way. Perhaps Cephas has not taken the time and patiently waited for the most favorable moment in which an image or relief with the full beauty of light and shadow reveal itself. Or perhaps Cephas was simply following the brief of the Simons to produce series of photographs as archaeological record. The directors of the National Museum of Antiquity in Leiden, Konrad Liemans, who was skeptical of the use of camera in documenting antiquity, complained that the contrast between light and shade is too strong, so the details of the original have become virtually unrecognizable. This is about Kinsbergen photograph. For Liemans, the theatricality is already in the story depicted in the relief. Therefore, the theatrical effect is redundant and not practical. Liemans even made technical suggestions such as use the reflective screens and rulers for scaling purpose, which Kinsbergen deliberately refused. Kinsbergen only had 3 people in the temple in his temple photograph out of respect of the religious sites, and this is partly what differentiates Kinsbergen from Cephas' photograph, their attitude toward the antiquity. Kinsbergen expressed his amazement and his respect, whereas Cephas also experienced Javanese antiquity as decorative object in gardens and houses of the elite he photographed. as a commission works, which explain his relaxed attitudes toward the object. Kassian Cephas was an established photographer. When Guruman invited him to be the Archaeological Society chief photographer, he was the professional photographer among amateur archaeologists, if you want to put it that way. He found the first photo studio in Yogyakarta in 1972 and ran it as a successful business together with his son, Sam. Now I'm just gonna jump to this photograph because I'm running out of time. So in that Prambanan monograph, there are 62 photographs of 62 Cephas photographs in the publications. The majority of them are series of relief depicting the journey of the fine hero Rama, as I told you. The Indologist G.P.H. Vogel, writing in 1921, acknowledged the significance of the publications for, quote, anything to do with antiquity in Java in the past 30 years, end quote. The photographs are the first clear photographic coverage of Indo-Javanese temple, from which Vogel was able to amend inaccurate descriptions, such as a glance of the photograph will show, for instance, that the world snake on which reclining in fact depicted with one head, something like that, or to challenge previous interpretations. For example, the figure with long beard who allegedly represent the king bears much more the characters of Brahman, something like that. So Vogel demonstrated the photograph's functions as an archaeological record when he consulted and juxtaposed the object more easily than the relief itself. The photograph then became the integral part of the method of scientific analysis. Vogel developed his argument based on Cephas' photograph. In this way, Cephas understood the required functions of his service. At the same time, Cephas saw the Prambanan project as the opportunity to showcase, exaggeratedly, some would say, the camera indeed changed hand from foreigner to native, when the native photographer has the liberty to put himself and his kind in the frame whenever and wherever he wanted. On the right is the first photograph attributed to Cephas. Actually, this identified by Rouffaer, dated in 1872. On the left, arguably the first photograph with Cephas himself in it, taken in Borobudur around the same time of the photograph on the left, as the numbering suggests. These two photographs are part of a photo album entitled Borobudur Temple Complex, also dated in 1872. There are 8 other temple photographs in the album. Out of these 10 archaeological photographs, 5 are with people. Their poses are fully orchestrated beyond the usual practical function for scaling purpose or to give local color. In fact, the local was in charge. In Prambanan project, all of the 9 non-relief photographs, Cephas functioned them beyond its archaeological purpose. To illustrate the hierarchical structures of the colonial society, as you can see in this photograph, where the local perform manual labor, pay attention to the right bottom, and the self-made man, the photographer is in the top of the social ladder. They become socially contained a documentary photograph. This photograph, I want to argue, become the triumphant gestures of acquisitions, not only to gain, but more importantly, to control one visibility as part of one participation in modernity. Cephas retook photography naturalized functions as a privileged medium of modern representations, and he used it to alter the very image of colonial archaeological project, the very image of modernity, and in doing so, he offered his vision. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. I'm just going to also do a very quick response. I'll try to summarize it so that there's enough time for people to ask questions, because I always think that's like the most exciting part of the talk. So actually, Alex and I have had several discussions on this topic of native photographers. I think over the past 2 years, we kind of meet every few months or so and then have a chat about this. And I thought today what I would do is actually respond from my role as a curator working in a national museum which collects photography, as opposed to Alex, who obviously was speaking as a photo historian and academic. So there are two main points I thought that I would bring up from that lecture. The first is regarding the complexity of early photo history, which I think came across very clear in the talk. Its multiple and overlapping roles in both art and science. And I mean, since the invention of photography, the medium has served both art and utilitarian purposes. Therefore, I think it's quite difficult to place early photography in neat categories. A documentary image might have artistic significance, or an important historical image might not have aesthetic significance. And I think this is further complicated in Southeast Asia by the fact that many photographers in the 19th and early 20th century worked across genres, which were much looser than how we perceive photography today. So what I mean is a single photographer might have made botanical studies, they have made studio portraits, ethnographic portraits, landscapes, and so on. So I think this line between art and non-art photographs was quite vague, I mean, at that point in time. And this point might be quite self-explanatory to most of the people in the audience today, but it actually has a significant implication for an art museum that's beginning to collect and exhibit photography. So when photographs don't sit fixedly within the category of art, what sort of photographs should be collected? And the other, I guess, thing that's always at the back of my mind as someone who is curating and collecting photography is that photography history and art history overlap, but they don't necessarily follow identical trajectories. So it complicates like the position of photography within an art museum. The multiple relationships that photography has to colonialism, archaeology, and art is, I think, particularly apparent in Alex's case studies today. And that also makes the medium particularly tough to grapple with in an art collection. And I think, again, quite clear from the presentation, you know, even though photographers made so-called art photographs, photographers were also attached to every major survey and archaeological expedition around the world since its invention. Therefore, in thinking about collecting and exhibiting photography, it is necessary to acknowledge and appreciate the way it has developed in multiple fields before I think we can apply more traditional art historical methods like form and style and iconography and so on. And this has been the case for the gallery's collecting of photography, and it's also how we are approaching the medium in the upcoming photography exhibition in November, which Roger briefly mentioned in his introduction. So this slippage between aesthetic and documentary functions of photography, I think, is both a challenge as well as an opportunity for scholars and curators to question existing canons of art and photography history. And that brings me to my second point in the response, which concerns colonialism, which again comes out very strongly, especially in the first half of Alex's presentation. So early photography clearly played an important role in visualizing the world, and that included Southeast Asia. So photography's history in Southeast Asia is closely linked to exploration, travel, and that ability to accurately depict the world around it. Alex has already talked about the large number of European photographers traveling through these parts of Southeast Asia, and these well-known photographers who successfully made a business from such work include John Thompson, Felice Pietro, Emile Wiesel, Charles Kleingroth, Tilly Wissenborn, and of course, Isidore van Kinsbergen, all of whom are featured in the exhibition. So that's an exhibition plug, but of course, Alex has talked extensively about Kinsbergen as well. And these photographers received significant recognition for their work, which brought images of the Far East to audiences in Europe interested in finding out more about foreign lands and peoples. So such photographs not only satisfied the curiosity of the European public, but I think also played a crucial role in conveying the extent and power of their empire. And this we should always have at the back of our mind when we're looking at a lot of these photos. In the past few decades, several scholars, including James Ryan and Susie Protsky, have recognized that many of the photographs made during this period resulted from European aims and desires, and so they present a type of imperial gaze. These scholars have demonstrated how such photographs made for European consumption reveal, I quote, as much about the imaginative landscape of imperial culture as they do about the physical spaces and people pictured within their frame. And so where does that leave photographers like Cephas and Chit, who we claim as native photographers, right? So they have an obvious importance to curators and scholars in Southeast Asia who are rushing to contribute to new global art histories in order to exit the shadow of Euro-American discourse and old colonial frameworks. I'm also one of those people, as are many curators. For institutions like National Gallery Singapore, I think there is a pressure to tell our own histories, whether it's Singapore history or Southeast Asian history. And the first step is obviously the recuperation of such figures like Cephas, figures like Chit. And so when we discover a native photographer like them, we kind of run over and as I described to Alex, kind of embrace them tightly and don't let go, right? Like, oh, native photographer, you have to claim them quickly. And this is certainly true from a collection point of view. And as scholars increasingly recognize the need to address the dominance of Eurocentric histories and knowledge, research on these photographers offer an additional strand in the tapestry that I guess is the global history of photography. However, I still remember when I joined the gallery 8 years ago. At that point, I wasn't that familiar with 19th century photography, and I remember looking at Cephas's work and wondering what exactly made it different from, let's say, Kinsbergen's work or Woodbury and Page and all the other photographers active in Indonesia at that point. And it was the same for Francis Chit. To me, like the subjectivity of Francis Chit's photos kind of emerged from the sitters rather than the photographer himself. So you know, like in our rush to reclaim these photographs, actually are these photographs simply contributing to an existing archive of imperial vision? And that's why today's paper was very interesting for me, and that's why we've been having these conversations, like myself and Alex, because I think this sort of research is attempting this next step beyond recuperation, right? It's a very important step beyond that initial claiming of these photographers. And I think in the paper just presented, I particularly enjoyed the visual analysis of the photographs, whether it's the human figures or the different toning or the angles that, for example, Kinsbergen was taking vis-a-vis Woodbury and Page. And this sort of research, I think, are key to go beyond this idea of reclamation and addresses the significance of such photographs within this history of Southeast Asia that I am grappling with in my own kind of curatorial research work. And particularly, I think the inclusion, I'm going to try to speak louder. The inclusion of Kinsbergen is particularly important because it suggests that native vision is not bound to birth. So we don't want to simply reverse imperial vision, but we don't want to get stuck into a dichotomy of either or, and we want to look at this first. And I'm going to end there because it's very noisy because there's some alarm test in my house outside right now, and I'll end that and move forward to Q&A.
Thanks, Charmaine. Alex, would you like to respond at all? We also have one question from the audience as well.
Yes, that's actually the thing that Charmaine brought into the conversation. So I see few names in the audience who can greatly contribute to this, because what Charmaine tried to argue, we should stop looking at those photographs based on we shouldn't start looking at those photographs from the color skins of the photographers, so to speak. we should look at the works itself and how this works, like I said, difference. Yeah, so this is not to overthrow this, like Sherman said, the rush to decolonize the artistry and so on and so forth. But also this is actually the aesthetic always overcome the ethic. Yeah. So if Kinsbergen get it right, the way he understand the value of a Nandi sacred cow, and then within the context of Javanese cultures, and he combined that within the context of Java, the climate in Java. So it is informed and tropical. Why it's not a native visions? Because Kinsbergen is not native. Is that it? So that's obviously is not satisfactory enough. That kind of explanations. So that's also to answer the critic the critic toward the I don't know that kind of movement to give the opportunity to whatever, as long as it is this, whatever, as long as it is that. That's not enough anymore. That's actually very patronizing in my opinion. We can just include some work because the photographer is this and is that. We could include the works because the work is good. Should start for that. But that's because I believe aesthetic always come before ethic, overcome ethic. In short.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks again, Charmaine, for your response. Alex, we have a question from the audience. I'm going to read it out for you. Thomas has said, many thanks for this fascinating lecture. From what I understand, European photographers like Woodbury and Page and Kinsbergen were interested in the status of Javanese art as archaeological studies through either an idealized Greco-Roman or a scientific lens. But I'm wondering if there are instances where European photographers adopted a kind of direct social commentary style similar to that of Cephas. And if so, are there any implications on our understanding of a local or native vision? So thanks, Thomas, for the question. Alex, while you're thinking about your response, let me just remind everyone in the audience that you can feel free to type your questions or comments directly into the Q&A box. Go ahead, Alex.
The answer to that is I don't know. Whether there's a very good question actually, but because it occurred to me to look at Cephas' influence. That's another unseen hurdle. That, thank you, Thomas, for reminding me. That's I never think of that. How Cephas influenced one. Oh, because there is no other native photographers. So I stopped looking at on record. I stopped looking at Cephas' influence. How about non-native photographers? Maybe Cephas' influence. So that's how this kind of patronizing Western view embedded in me as the non-Western entity. Some that the answer to that I don't know. That will be very interesting to see how Cephas might influence photographers, which is very likely because Cephas was very successful. He was the very first photo studio, not the very first photographer, but very first studio operating in Jogja. And after that, many photographers operating in Jogja, and he kind of set the standard, the industry standard, photographing different kind of industrial places, the factory, the agricultures, the houses, those kind of standard that the clientele like, and then the photographers come after Cephas should follow and should depart from there, because his son Sam Cephas passed away in a very young age. So that kind of question, I think I should start to to pursue, maybe for other photo historians, to looking at the influence of the native, so-called the non-Western or the non-Caucasians of photographers in Southeast Asia, how Francis Chit's influence photographers after him in Thailand, Cephas, in Java.
Thanks very much, Alex. We have time for one more question from the audience, if there are any. While people are gathering their questions, perhaps, Alex, could I ask you to speak a little bit more about the influence of Cephas today? You mentioned that the anthropologist that he worked, the archaeologist that he worked with were self-taught, and of course we're in a very different infrastructural and institutional scenario today, where many of the contemporary artists who take up photography study it formally in institutions and academies in Indonesia and across Southeast Asia, as well as further afield. What's the position? What do young artists, young photographers make of Cephas's work today? How is it received and sort of circulated within contemporary practices today?
There are, since the publications of the Cephas book, in I don't know, in 1999, something like that. It didn't bring Cephas right to the front lines of photographers' knowledge in Indonesia, but it's growing, obviously, because of the advancements of the availability to access Cephas works through the collections of Tropen Museum. It's now become the World Cultural Museums and the KITLV. The people start to googling, start to find photograph. The photograph of Cephas on the internet, but I haven't seen. I don't know, at least how people specifically try to respond to Cephas. There are few studies about Cephas, but in terms of influence, the way photographers influence, the way, for example, Julia Margaret Cameron's influenced the works of female photographers in England now. That's not there yet, because there's more, should be more studies, should be more visual analysis to answer what is it actually Cephas contributions among the practice of photography in 19th century Java, for example. That needs to be unveiled first before young photographers try to respond to it. And the interest of to Cephas works, in my knowledge, is still more historical in nature.
Thanks, Alex. I think Charmaine has a comment, and then I'll ask the final question from the audience.
I actually just wanted, like, when you were talking about Chit and from the first question as well, that actually an interesting comparative analysis might be Grolier in Cambodia vis-a-vis Kinsbergen. So this idea of a figure who's neither native or foreign. So figures that kind of fall in the not in the either or category, and therefore present, I think, quite an interesting entry point to think about native vision, because they're not. Like, so Grolier was French but born in Cambodia and then continued to live and work there and contribute within that space for, I guess, most of his life. And I think that's what I enjoyed most about the paper. Is like this, like, it's a way for us to think beyond kind of nationality, or as Alex described it, skin color, and to try to allow for, I guess, a more complicated discussion about some of these works, and including the way that the so-called native photographer can then influence the European photographers, because, as you mentioned, both Chit and Cephas were so successful in their respective, like from a commercial point of view, in terms of their studio. And I would imagine that Grolier, having published the first book on Cambodian dance and all that, the photos that were circulating, would also have had potentially sort of impact on how then Cambodian dance would have been subsequently depicted by photography or even beyond photography, in painting or watercolor and whatnot. Yeah.
So I on that. Oh, can I say something, Roger? So on that line, I just want to share my own experience. I somehow unconsciously try to stay away from Cephas when I started when I started my research on the history of Indonesian photography, the history of Dutch East Indies photography, because I don't want to be seen as, oh, of course you are Indonesians, you will looking at the works. I'm Javanese as well. You are Javanese, you are Indonesian. Of course, you're going to look at the works of Cephas. So actually, Cephas' works came to me through his commercial works. When I looking at the family photographic albums of the sugar industrialists, when I start to find, oh, this is the work of Cephas, this is the work of Cephas, this is the work of Cephas, that actually this guy is not only the photographers of the Sultan, the photographer of this, was this guy actually more. So that's how I developed my interest to Cephas through his commercial works, not through his works, not through his identity as the Japanese photographer.
Thanks, Alex. So on this topic of complicating identities, we have a question from the audience from Gail Newton, another great supporter of the gallery's work. She asks that what perhaps needs considering is that both Cephas and Francis Chit in Bangkok were Christians, and they may have been exposed to visual as well as text influences. Mindful of the time, I'll also mention that Woody has entered in the chat that's why there was so little mention of Cephas during our workshop 10 years ago. So I think we've run out of time. So Alex, if you'd like to respond to Gail's comment, and then we can wrap up. Thank you very much.
Yes, that's obviously I will not considering that thing, that the fact that Cephas converted to Christianity, because in that context become Christians is another sign to be moderns, and then it's the double modernity, to be Christian and to be the photographers. So it is and the two is coincide. And also, yes, of course, Gail says Francis Chit, where both of them changed their name to Christian name. That's some kind of no, the correlations can be just accidental. So there's some kind of explanations to that must vary in the Philippines. For example, that's why this effort to connect those kind of the dots of the regional natures of photography development in 19th century Southeast Asia become more and more urgent. When we start to picking up the things, and then we start to see obvious things that we need to unpack. For example, religions, the role of Christianity in the developments of photography in Southeast Asia, something like that, and the modernity.
Okay, thanks, Alex, and thank you again, Charmaine. I think it's clear that there's a lot more work to be done, but I think today's lecture and response has really opened up some exciting possibilities for future research. So thank you both again for your presentations. Thank you all for being here. And a friendly reminder that the Living Pictures Photography in Southeast Asia lecture series will continue this Friday, the 18th of February, with 2 lectures. You can find out further details about that on the gallery's Facebook page and website. So thank you again and have a good day.